How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Are you all in California?
We're
Where you
in
all
Southern
are?
California, no, just north of San Diego.
Okay, yeah, because I kind of looked at the church. I guess someone on my team got the time wrong, so I was like ready. I came on at 4:30, but there it was like, oh, nothing has started. So I then like looked at where you are and was like, okay.
There we go. Well, I'm glad that you were
Sometimes
able.
time differences can be like just confusing.
Where are you calling from?
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis. Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
2 hours different.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we're so excited to talk with you. We've been reading your book over the last month and meeting periodically to talk about it, and so um, we have lots of questions for you. And so excited that you're able to join us. Dr. Christena Cleveland is a social psychologist, public theologian, author, and activist. She is the founder and director of the Center for Justice and Renewal, as well as its sister organization, Sacred Folk, which creates resources to stimulate people's spiritual imaginations and support their journey toward liberation. An award-winning researcher and former professor at Duke University's Divinity School, Dr. Cleveland is an avid student of embodied wisdom. She is also the author of God is a Black Woman, which is why we are gathered here today. So welcome, Dr. Cleveland. We are so thrilled to talk with you.
Thank you for introducing me and thank you for having me, everyone. And it's nice to see faces and hello to everyone who's not on, doesn't have their camera on. I'm an introvert, so I salute you.
We actually have a couple Duke Divinity graduate students with us on the call.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes.
Yay.
And Claire was had signed up to take your class at Duke right before you left. And so when we were getting ready to talk, she's like, oh, I finally get my chance. So we're
Oh.
excited. But let's just dive in. And again, if you have questions, just raise your hand. But just to get things started, we so enjoyed this book, and we were just, it's such a gift to us. And we're wondering, what were you hoping that people were going to get out of it when you were writing it? Like, who was your audience, and what was your hope that people would
Yeah, so I'm glad it's nice to hear that you all, and I'm looking at faces that I've categorized as white. Oh, okay, no, there we go. We have a woman of color joining us. I see you. Hello. But oh, sorry, did I miss someone? Okay, Eleanor. Okay, see, thank you for identifying yourself. The book was written for Black women. And actually, it was a collaboration. It was an editorial collaboration between Harper One, which is HarperCollins's spiritual division, and Amistad, which is HarperCollins's Black division. So we actually had a wonderful collaboration in that sense, and it was written for Black women. And often white women don't like the book and have very strong thoughts and feelings about that. So, whenever white women are interested in reading about spirituality from Black women's perspective, I think that benefits white women. But I think white women are often used to being the center of the story. And so I've gotten a lot from white women, like, I couldn't really find myself in your story. Yeah, because it's not about you.
Yeah.
But yeah, the audience was Black women. And that was very intentional editorially. That said, I think that my book, the goal was to help anyone find themselves in the divine. And so one of the things that's been really powerful is hearing like Black trans men telling me, oh my gosh, I loved your book. It's helping me see myself in God. Or hearing like Asian women, or, all sorts of people, Black men, all sorts of people who aren't Black women, who have said, wow, like your journey kind of gave me the imagination to go on my own journey. And I think that's what, a lot of liberation theologies have done for me. I know that like at the very beginning of my sort of awakening, maybe 12 years ago, I started reading a lot of Palestinian liberation theology. That was like what I read for like an hour before I went to bed every night. And just hearing, Palestinian theologians saying things like Samson was the first suicide bomber. And here's how we can see the divine in suicide bombers. Here's how we can see humanity in suicide bombers. That really gave me license to say, oh, so I can interpret things differently than the way that I've been taught. And so, yeah.
I have so many questions just based on what you,
Yeah.
I want to know some of those recommendations for the Palestinian theologian. One of, I think our group has been meeting. So this group came about after the murder of George Floyd. We really dove deep into social justice. We read a lot of Black theologians. You reference Nice White Ladies, Jessie Daniels. We just read her book and talked with her a couple weeks ago. So we're really on the path to create an expansive understanding of God and to not center the white voice and to really continue to grow our idea of God. So we've done a little bit of foundational work. And so I think maybe that's maybe why we were at a place. I've had people say, I tried to pick up God as a Black woman and I had to put it down. And they're not, you have to be ready, maybe, is a way to say that. But one of my questions—
it's also a heavy book. And so a lot of Black women have said, I've been reading it for the last year because I resonate with so much of your story, and that's painful too. It's like, I feel seen, and also it's painful. So, it's one of those, but it's not for everyone, and it's not for everyone right now. So yeah.
You mentioned liberation theology, and just for clarification for some folks, is you talk about liberation theology, womanist theology, feminist theology. Can you just talk a little bit about those differences, kind of like in a little snapshot, just so there's some clarification around those things?
Yeah, I can certainly talk about the way I think of it. I mean, I'm guessing there might be different perspectives, but I would say that both womanist and feminist theologies technically fall under the umbrella of liberation theology, although liberation theology does have a very specific history, and it's very much rooted in like Black and Latinx theological streams. But I think that a lot of feminist theology, which I would say was like probably technically the precursor to was before womanist. I'd say a lot of feminist theology was inspired by liberation theology. And again, this idea that a person's your embodied perspective on the world matters when interpreting not just scripture, but also who God is. And also this general idea that God is active in the world and working for justice, and whatever that looks like, whether it's gender justice, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's racial. And so, I would say, if you're in my newsletter, on Juneteenth, I wrote about how I spent an evening with Dr. Gay Wilmore, who's like the father of Black liberation theology. And so, I mean, I think someone like him would say theology is liberation theology is anything that is affirming the dignity and sanctity of oppressed peoples, and affirming their connection to the divine and the importance of their lives in the universe of the divine. And then feminist theology, I mean, it's technically supposed to be for women, but it's just so often for white women. But it is, I was inspired by a lot of early feminist theologians for sure. And then womanists, I would say, they're unique from feminists in that they're centering Black women's perspectives, and they're particularly interested in what the divine is doing in and through Black women. And I would say womanists are distinct from Black feminists, which is a whole nother category, in that womanists tend to be much more interested in religion, both informally and formally, whereas a lot of Black feminists are really interested in distinguishing themselves from general feminism, because that's sort of just white feminism, but they're not as interested in the project of the church. So womanists are often like, I want to, figure out how to make sense of this patriarchal theology, and most Black feminists are like, burn it. And so you do see like different religious perspectives, some coming from Black feminists. So like a Tamura Lomax, who wrote something Jezebel. It's really good. I quote her in my book. I'm blanking the name. Jezebel Unleashed. I want to say Jezebel Unleashed, something along those lines. And she would say she's a black feminist. Huh? What is it?
Unhinged. Jezebel
Unhinged. Right. Jezebel Unhinged. And she would say she's a black feminist, not a womanist, because she's really interested in critiquing and then moving on from the church, even though her husband is a pastor vocationally, which is really funny. I would love to be a fly on the wall at their dinner conversations. And then womanists would be, you know, someone more like a Monica Coleman or like a Kelly Brown Douglas, who are very much still working in the church and trying to find like sort of feminist pathways through that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah.
And I just want to pause if there were, because that was I know we had a couple discussions around that. Is there any follow-up questions about those distinctions? I just wanted to make sure. And so where are you in your journey now? Are you consider yourself a womanist?
Oh, that's such a good question. No, I've actually sort of stepped away. Well, I mean, maybe, but like I've stepped away from even using feminism or womanism as a way of thinking. I tend to think more in terms of matriarchy. That's ancient. And to me, it says more about how power should look or can look, and how communities can be organized. One of the things that's always bothered me about both feminism and womanism and Black feminism is that, and even to a certain extent liberation theology, is that because these came out of the academy, many of the pioneers, and to a certain extent, a lot of people now, are still very much trying to put everything in a way, say everything in a way that makes sense to the academy. And so you end up having like feminist and womanist writers whose books are like incomprehensible. Elizabeth Schessler Fiorenzo would be a great example of that. Like, because, and it's like, I'm not even critiquing her. It's just that in the context that she was in, she had to write that way in order to be seen as legitimate. But there's something about patriarchy and talk like that says that communication is in the patriarchal world, communication is used to dominate. And in the matriarchal world, communication is used to relate. In the patriarchal world, language is used to dominate, versus in the matriarchal world, it's used to relate. And then also, if you just think about the way patriarchal societies and pathways are centered around production and dominance and hierarchy, whereas matriarchal pathways are centered around needs and nurturing and identifying how we all come together around meeting our needs. So just as I've just thought through some of this, I just have been thinking, you know, I of course I'm a feminist. Like I want all people to have the same equality regardless of gender. And also I'm really wanting to move into spaces and create spaces and co-create spaces that are centered around need and not dominance. And I think so many of the Black feminist and womanist and feminist spaces are still really organized around dominance and competition and production, because they come out of academia. And they're still very much tethered to academia.
Right. There's so much just there in that space. I had never thought of, you're right. I know I live in that kind of world where I have to produce, right? Just even feeling that in the church versus that matriarchal, it's a much more, I want to say action, but not action like production, but there's like a holistic approach to what you just described. I have to sit with it. Are there ways to research that and kind of understand it at a deeper level?
Yeah, you know, there's lots of work. So I'm wondering if I'm surrounded by some of my books, but I'm not sure if it's here. There's a book called The Societies of Peace. That's an edited volume that I think is edited by Heidi Gottner, something or other. I want to say she's Belgian or Dutch or something. So there, but she talks a lot about it's an edited volume, so it's a good introduction. And she talks about current and historical matriarchal societies and how they're organized. It's called Societies of Peace. It's like the cover is orange and green. And so that's one place to start, but a lot of imagining, really, and I think another thing I would say is sometimes the mujeristas really produce their work in a way that to me feels very matriarchal and like a resisting patriarchy. And so even just their interest in lo quotidiano, like finding the sacredness in the everyday things, and really looking at like everyday women's lives as the lens, so which you don't always see in feminist and Black feminist and womanist writings. But I think the mujeristas, the Latina feminists really center kind of like the grandma on the street, and kind of how she's encountering the divine. So that some of those can be, so like some of those writers can be pretty fabulous and like incredible to read.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and it reminds me of in your book, when it started, you after you leave Duke, or maybe it's even while you're at Duke.
Yeah, I wrote Duke. I wrote that book I went on my pilgrimage while I was still at Duke.
Yeah.
But I knew at the end of my pilgrimage, there was like, I didn't write about this, but like I was walking back from like the last Black Madonna, and I had this like moment like where I was just like, okay, so I could go home and write a book, or I could go home and be transformed. Like this could be a cute trip that with lots of cute stories, and like it'd probably even be good. Or I can I can really take seriously my belief that God is a Black woman and let that transform everything. And so then that's when I was like, okay, yeah, like if God's a Black woman, then I don't have to keep working on the plantation in order to stay alive, in order to have what I need. So so then that became like my next big thing. Like I'm gonna put this to the test. and try to live it, as opposed to just continuing what I believed, which was that I have to take care of myself because nobody's looking out for me and nobody understands. By nobody, I mean like no divine being.
What was that process like for you, letting it transform you?
Oh, every single day it was like fire, I mean, it still kind of is. I mean, even on my team, we often ask that question as we're taking risks, or as we're making different offerings, or we're trying to decide how much to charge, or, just all the things like, well, what is abundance saying? And how do we move through this in abundance? Trusting that somehow, somewhere, we don't have to exploit ourselves. We don't have to work ourselves to death. We don't have to say yes to opportunities that with organizations that can't hold what we put down as Black women in order to survive, in order to have the lights on, in order to have medical insurance. And so, asking that question, if we really believe that God is a Black woman, how will that guide us? And so, the result is that you spend a lot more time in spiritual practice than in work, so that then you can be ready to do the work. And that's kind of how my life is. One of the ways my life has changed. I spend half my time doing spiritual practices that connect me to abundance, a wide variety. And then the other half of my time is industrial work, which I would answering emails, meeting with my team, writing, doing things like this. And so it's like 20/20, and I do 40 a week, even when I'm writing and have deadlines. Yeah.
What are some of those spiritual practices?
Oh, yeah. It's like everything. So there are 3 people that I talk to every morning for 15 minutes each that are just like life-giving spiritual connections. So, and they're like, it's intergenerational. It's also all that good stuff, meditation, prayer, exercise, any of like my spiritual direction or therapy or anything that I'm doing, creative things. Like I do a lot of like embodied practice, going for a walk and having a 2-hour conversation with a life-giving friend, sleeping. It varies every day, but yeah, usually my mornings are devoted, because I'm a morning person. So I want to give my best time of the day to that, so I can be really present. If I'm taking, if I'm doing I'm always doing some sort of like spiritual class or something to grow. And so I want to make sure I'm giving that my best time. And then in the afternoons, I usually schedule things, and I also write in the afternoons. Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself falling back into that that world that we were?
Yeah, not really. But the part of the impetus for this was my like digestive system shut down too, right around my pilgrimage. And so it was kind of a wake up call that my life was indigestible. And so I just, yeah. So I will say when I have like a big deadline around a book or a project, I have to be especially intentional about holding the margins. But it's amazing. I mean, it feels like a miracle because the work gets done. It's so interesting. Like, it's like I can sit down and write as much in 4 hours as if I had spent 8 hours. Because I'm rested, I'm centered, I'm fearless. I can come to my laptop without fear, without insecurity, or significantly reduced, you know. Plus, a lot of the times I'm spending the mornings reading poetry or reading things that inspire me, or doing a lot of body movement with it. So I'm like, so just the ideas are integrated with my body. And so it's just, yeah, it's interesting. And I learned this actually, this is co-opted from the Ohlone people. When I was bedridden, when my digestive system shut down, I was bedridden for 3 months. And one of my friends, one of the people I talk to every day, actually, they just turned 73. Wait, how old am I? I'm 42. Yeah, they're exactly 30 years older than me, almost. So they just turned 73. And they're the ones who said, well, I read this book about the Ohlone people. And they spent 19 hours a week on average on industrial tasks, and spent the other rest of their quote work week, end quote, doing community gatherings, spiritual. So for example, like the men would hunt, and they would spend like 4 hours in the sweat lodge meditating and then go hunt for 4 hours because they knew it was interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
They were related to the elk and the deer and the whatever. And so they had these built-in practices where they considered there was no separation between spiritual work, community connection, and industrial work. It was all integrated. And so I just said, okay, cool, 20 hours a week. Great. I'm going to do it like the Ohlone people.
That's so, whenever I first decided I wanted to be a pastor, I thought that would be like naturally built in. Like, oh, when you're a pastor, you just do that. It's like you pray and it just like has totally gotten away from me. And it's reminding me like about discipline and boundaries and practice and all that stuff. So
yeah. And the world's a better place. I mean, part of leading my team is really challenging because we're trying to do it in a matriarchal way where like everyone legitimately gets a say. And it doesn't matter what your degree is or how old you are. And we're really doing a lot of body wisdom, and we're trying to treat everything like an experiment. And we're trying to be really kind to ourselves and to each other in the context of mistakes. And I'm an Enneagram 1, if anybody knows the Enneagram. So I'm like, I don't believe in mistakes. Mistakes are of the devil, you know? And then also I'm a Leo, sun, moon, and rising. So like giving up. So all of this spiritual work helps me to just show up as someone who can be soft and can be kind and can have compassion for myself, which means I get to have compassion for others. Mm-hmm. And someone made a huge mistake on our team 2 weeks ago. And when they came to the meeting to talk to me about it, they just said, well, if there's one thing I know, it's like one of the best things I've heard in like a year. They're like, if there's one thing I know, it's that Christena will understand and will have compassion. And I was just like, that's like amazing. So it's worth it, you know, when to do that work, because then I get to show up in the world in a way that is consistent with what I'm saying. Is, you know, to the best of my ability, imperfectly, of course, but, you know, to the best of my ability.
Question in the chat: is it necessary to humanize God as a man or a woman?
Oh, is it necessary? That's a good question. It's been necessary for me. I can say that in part because it's God's already been humanized as a man.
Right.
And so I think for me, it has been really healing and liberating for me to understand God as a woman. But I also think that it's been powerful for me to experience God in a river, or to see God as a river too. But I think before I could move on to some of those other things, or even, I mean, honestly, now I refer to God as they almost as often as she, but I could have never gone straight to they, because then I wouldn't have dealt with like the heart of the patriarchal issue, which is that it's been male.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, I think hopefully that humanizing God just sets us up on a pathway to find ourselves in the divine, so that we can stop trying to control everything and stop trying to be God. And then hopefully that's a pathway to seeing God in everything, even in our enemies, which a Palestinian taught me too when I was in Haifa. But yeah, I think the problem of like God being a white man is that it doesn't actually heal anyone, even white men. Because like, wouldn't the world be amazing if white men actually believed they were sacred? Like that would literally be the end of everything that's wrong with the world. If white men actually believed that they were sacred, then they wouldn't have to bully everybody, hold on to power. Like,
Right.
and so, I mean, I think that's the problem with God as a white man, is that it's not a healing and liberative concept. It's not, I don't think the problem is that God's been humanized or even racialized. It's just that it's been aligned with power in a way so that it's no longer a healing and liberating concept.
I'm going to jump in real quick and remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel or check out our podcast wherever you get your podcast.
You can also visit our website, thecollectivetable.org, to find out who we are and what we do.
And keep up with us on social media at The Collective Table.
One of my questions was, well, before, and I think you kind of explained that. I was just trying to figure out, when you said that you were off of the plantation, if that means what, that you're directing your life and the way you want to do it without having other people tell you how to do it?
No, thanks for letting me clarify. No, I think it's more of a mentality than a location. And I think that there are people who could work in academic institutions, and I wouldn't assume that they are on the plantation. You know, it's just that for me, I was hired by Duke Divinity School to be the director of the Center for Reconciliation. But reconciliation, I learned very quickly when I got there, is not possible at Duke Divinity School, because there are so many forces within the school systemically that are anti-Black and anti-reconciliation that it was important for me to do that work outside of that context. And I realized that the only reason why I was staying there is because it was prestigious and it gave me a sense of academic platform that I thought I could not have access to without the plantation, because I was afraid, as an unmarried Black woman who is like many unmarried Black women, I don't have any family money or family resources to rely on. It's the opposite. They rely on me. And so I thought, oh, I won't have health insurance. Like I won't have income. Like I have to stay here. And it just makes me think a lot about, Harriet Tubman, who, oh gosh, I think about her almost every day. She was taught, probably similarly to me, that life is a plantation and this is the best it's going to be for you. So your goal is to be the most powerful Negro on the plantation, to work the system as best you can, but the system is always going to be against you. And somehow she woke up one day and was just like, I'm too sacred for this. I don't know how she got there. I wish I knew. But then she had to imagine, because all she knew was life on the plantation, the language of the plantation, the skills she had on the plantation, the geography of the plantation. Like, how is it even possible to survive in a way where I'm not being exploited and I'm not being worked to death? And my my livelihood is not dependent on me staying in a space that is literally killing me. I think what's interesting is as soon as you might leave a plantation space, like the one that I was in at Duke Div, then you realize there are like 25 more plantations just waiting for, just trying to lure you in. And now I understand why Harriet Tubman would threaten to shoot people if they turned back. Because as soon as you step off, you're like, oh, now what? And then all of the fears come up. And then what's amazing is when I left Duke Divinity School, I wrote an open letter, I guess, I don't know. And I sent it to one of my former college professors, who's now a dean, and is also Black. And he's at Dartmouth. He was at Dartmouth when I was a first year student, and he's still there. But now he's, has more power. And he read it, and he was, because I was just like, oh, I'm pretty sure like no one in academia will ever hire me again. And he read it, and he's like, oh no, you're still totally hireable. I was like, what? He was like, two things. One, you didn't name any names. That's huge. He's all, two, you'd be surprised at how powerful tokenism is. And sure enough, like a month later, I got a job offer from Berkeley, just out of the blue. You know what I mean? And so it's like, there's always going to be something else to lure you in. And then if it's not that, it's, oh, come speak at our conference where it's totally tokenism and exploitation, but we're going to pay you well. So so I think you can be off the quote plantation institutionally and still be making choices that are in line, that are based on resource scarcity and not based on abundance. And so and actually I did that this year. I agreed to collaborate with an organization. This time of year is always a little scary for me because I haven't quite lined up how I'm going to make money the next year. And so now I'm noticing, okay, it's okay. Like this, it's okay to be afraid this time of year. Cause you're right. It's a big question mark. But this time last year, an organization that could not hold what I put down reached out to me and said, please collaborate with us. And so I was out of fear. I said, okay, yes, I will. And then this spring when then we worked for months. And the spring when we actually did the collaboration, it was like horrible in every way. So it's possible to be off the quote plantation and still be like on the plantation.
And like, so that's an example of where you found yourself back up, like you were off the plantation, but you went back on for that moment. And how do you, and is this where the spiritual practice comes in to determine this is tokenism, this is not, this, like, and do you find yourself like, okay, now I'm in this, do I get out of it?
Yeah, I had so many, like, and that's why I'm so glad there's several wise folks that I talk to regularly. Yeah, I mean, it was a huge discernment question, at the point that it became really clear. Well, I mean, on a level, I kind of knew in my body that I was making a choice out of fear. But it became about 3 months in, it became really clear based on a meeting that we had. That it wasn't going to be, it wasn't going to work. So then I did have to decide, do I stay in it or not? And so, which was, could have gone either way at that point.
You were saying that white men don't see themselves as sacred. So could you tell me who white God is?
Well, I mean, that's the problem. Like white God. Okay, well,
I mean, because I read the book and I kept thinking they're white men who think they're in control, but you said they don't see themselves as sacred.
Well, I think if you actually know your power, you don't have to control others.
Okay.
And so, at least that's kind of been my experience. Like my need to control has come out of fear. Fear that I'm not going to get what I need. I'm going to lose something that I have, or I'm afraid of what people think. One of those, right? That's usually when I'm trying to control myself, trying to control others. And so I think if you don't know your power, and I don't mean power in terms of social power, but just sort of innate power, I think we try to control and dominate others. I also think that if we don't actually see ourselves as sacred and held, then it's really hard for us to move through the world and navigate the fears that just come up as being a human being. And so the way that white male God was constructed was really to be used as a tool of oppression, like anything else in white patriarchy, right? I mean, white male God was created to justify the subjugation and enslavement of Black and brown people. So this whole entity, demon, whatever you want to call it, wasn't even created as a way to honor the sacredness of people. It was created to justify the desecration of people. And so when I think of white God or white male God, that's what I think of, this political tool. And so it's not healing to anybody, including white men. And that's the problem. I mean, and I talk a little bit about that in the book, like white male God's tiny, terrifying circle of acceptability. Like no one actually gets the spot in it because everyone's constantly striving. No one's ever actually arrived. And so then therefore no one's safe. And if no one's safe, then we're just acting out of fear all the time. Yep. And that's why people say, like, there's like 6,000 nerve endings in the clitoris, but it's still not as sensitive as a white man on the internet. It's like, well, yeah, this is someone who's out there in the world, like afraid and insecure and doesn't believe that the divine has their back and that they can move through the world without controlling and hoarding and holding on to power and without, that they don't believe that. And that's something I've kind of had to try to train myself. Like, hey, Christina, if God's a Black woman, you can believe that you can take risks. You can be generous with resources, with time, with power. You can do things outside of the box if that's life-giving to you. And if your embodied wisdom is leading you in that way, and it's going to be okay. You'll be protected. You'll be safe.
Do you think that there are any benefits to white male God?
As constructed? I mean, sure-ish. So, I mean, I think there are benefits to people building community. Mm-hmm. I think individualism is so rampant, especially in the United States, that I'm guessing there are limits to this, but I mean, there are a lot of really beautiful churches that essentially believe in white male God, and they're full of white folks, and they all come together. And when someone has a baby, they set up a meal train. And when someone in their community, is homeless, people open up the doors to them. I think that's beautiful. And that's like a glimpse of what life can be like. I think the fact that it's centered around white male God really limits who's in and who's out, and sort of sets up some exclusivity and some boundaries that I think are more hurtful than helpful. And I think it limits. Someone recently just said, whenever you see a line, God's on the other side, and I think it's really hard for them to imagine that. But I also don't want to downplay like people loving each other as best they can, even if it's loving people like themselves, because it's a tough life out here. And now that I think I'm just less interested in forcing everyone to do things differently, because I feel more safe in the world because of my theological beliefs. I mean, I think it's helpful and healing for them to expand and to really challenge like their internal white supremacy and all that good stuff. And also, I'm also grateful for the ways that they're able to build community in those limited ways, even with the limitations.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was also thinking about white male God, the systems in which we do community, or the systems in which we practice faith are within that. And I think a lot of people are thinking like, okay, what comes after whatever Christianity looks like now. Like, what is it going to look like? Or what is the church going to look like?
Yeah.
But we've been so limited in this white male godness of thinking, like even just the matriarchy, like to like shift thinking in that way. And like, what could it look like if it was based on that as your foundation, as opposed to patriarchy, right? And so not just white male
like,
God.
I mean, there are some like very unique and distinct and potentially beautiful aspects of American society that we like can directly link to the religious background and the fact that religion plays such a huge role in our society. So for example, I spend so much time in France now, I've started to like make friends with people. And one of the people that I met is like like a typical French person in her 40s, like atheist, maybe a humanist, like Christianity is stupid, like all those sorts of things. And she and her partner had a baby. And so the last time I went to visit them, I brought like a little onesie. It was so cute. It was like a pea pod onesie. Oh my gosh. And so I brought it to her and I said, hey, here you go. Congratulations. She's like, what's this? And she opened it. She's like, what's this for? And I was like, it's for your baby. It's like a baby gift. And she's like, why? And I'm like, well, in the US, like we give a baby gift when someone has a baby. And she was so shocked. And she was just like, you know what, you know my beliefs on religion and everything. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, but at the same time, I like how Americans kind of take care of each other. And she's like, I think that's because of the religious communities. And she said, me and my husband just moved to this town and it's so hard to meet people because everyone's just in their own worlds. And she's like, no one's given us anything, even though lots of people know that all of our neighbors know we're having a baby. All of our colleagues know we're having a baby. And like, no one's given us anything. You're the first. That's why she was like, I was shocked that you get, and I was just like, yeah, that's like what you do in America, you know? But those sorts of, it's really because it's a religious society, you know? And it's organized around. So yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons. Mm-hmm. I used to want to throw everything out, the baby out with the bathwater until I realized that throwing the baby out with the bathwater is like an inherently white patriarchal thing to do.
That was the exact term I was going to use. And I keep thinking, how do you save the baby and get rid of the water, you know?
Yeah. Or how, well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like, matriarchy, indigenous people of color communities, my ancestors, they were all about reclamation. Mm-hmm. You know, like you let go of what absolutely has to die because that's part of the life process. And then you heal everything else. You reimagine, you start again. It's kind of like the Nayira Wahid poem that, you know, she says, you know, I don't lose something along the lines of, I don't lose any sleep when the world ends because the world has ended for me many times before and begun again the next morning. And that's totally how all my Black female friends, especially my Black friends here in my neighborhood in North Minneapolis, which is a low income Black neighborhood in Minneapolis. After Trump got elected and like white people were like crying and like white women were like, I can't believe like politics is not on my side. Like for the first time, now we know Supreme Court, a bunch of other things, you know, but that was like a wake up call for a lot of white women. And all my neighbors here in North Minneapolis were just like, have we ever not had a bogus president who was anti-Black? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we'll keep on going. Like, this is what we do. Like, even Obama, because the office of the presidency of the United States is anti-Black. Like it kind of doesn't matter who's in it, you know? Like, so they were just like, I mean, yeah, obviously it does, but they were just like, the world has died, you know, the world's ended a bajillion times for us and it always begins again the next day. Like we keep moving, we reclaim, we reimagine, we work together like that. And there's a matter of factness to that. That's just like very different than what you see at a lot of white patriarchal spaces. So
it is what you're saying. Like there's just so much going off in my mind right now. And I'm realizing how much I live in, you know, I know that I have this white privilege and I live in this white patriarchal world, but just like, you're right. Like I sometimes I'm like, how do you create space in this capitalistic patriarchal world? I don't know if I can do it. And you're saying, yeah, that's because you white lady are just waking up. I've been doing this for a long, like this is how it is.
Yeah. And I get that. And I learned, and I have those same realizations too, when I'm spending time with folks who don't have the class privilege that I have, or Black trans folks, you know, where it's like, oh, like, yeah. And so you start to realize there's so many limitations that privilege come with privilege, you know?
I do think about people who don't have those options, who have to work 8 to 5 every day just to put food on the table, to
or like, or more than that,
double
or
jobs.
two 8 to 5s. Yeah.
Right, two 8 to 5s just to have food on the table, pay the rent, and it's, just scraping by. It's like they're, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was in Nablus, living amongst some Palestinian activists, someone said, despair is a luxury of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
And I have not forgotten that.
Very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. They were like, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
Like, we come together, we lament, which is different than despair. You know what I mean? Like, we lament, and that's an embodied practice where we come together and we affirm our pain, and then we also, the lament and hope are connected. They're two sides of the same coin. And so we connect the hope and we keep going. And I was just like, yeah, like, I'll never forget this conversation.
Good.
Yeah.
In your book, you talk so much about Madonnas, specifically Black Madonnas, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to what do Madonnas mean to you, and how does it connect to God for you? Is it deity? Is it something else? How would you describe it?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I think of the Black Madonna as a representation of the divine. Historically, she is a Christianized version of the old dark goddesses, and specifically the ones in France that I spend a lot of time with have a connection to Isis and Cybele and Black Artemis of Ephesus. So that whole region of France, the pre-Roman people who we would call pagans worshipped those dark goddesses who go back to the beginning, based some of the earliest goddesses. So, I would say, I think she's a representation of the divine. I think that she's a modern day representation of the old goddess. Some people say she's Mary, like actual Mary. And that's like, interesting. So a lot of like Catholic mystics would say that she's Mary, the mother of God, who then other people would just say who was just a Christianized version of the old goddess. Just like, it's when you start to really go down these rabbit holes, you see that like, yeah, I don't know if we want to get into this, but you start to see that like, Jesus and I'm blanking on the Greek God right now, like almost exactly the same in the mythology. Oh, I forget, it's one of the gods. And so then it's like, of course he had to have a virgin birth because the gods are always born of a virgin birth, and Of course he had to have a consort who was either a mother or a wife because the gods always do. And kind of this like, so folks who really are proponents of that would say that that Mary was, the dark goddess showing up. And then she did move to Ephesus after Jesus's death and resurrection. And so then a lot of people say that that she sort of became Black Artemis of Ephesus, or Black Artemis of Ephesus kind of took on the characteristics of Mary. And
I'll make a comment that I found it interesting that I really appreciated the inclusion of the pictures of the statues in the book. It really gave me a good idea. It was kind of personification, physical personification of what you were talking about. And I contrast that to the concept of the white male god, which I couldn't get a physical picture of in my mind. I know what you're talking about in terms of the church and culturally, but in comparison to the Black Madonna, which gave me kind of some clarity about, personification. I just want to bring up the contrast to me that kind of struck me.
Thank you. I took those pictures on my iPhone 4 or something. I always have like a super old iPhone because I don't care. But I just remember right around that time going and doing some work in southern India, and the kids in the orphanage making fun of my iPhone because they get newer ones because Americans send them to them. And so they're like, whoa, your iPhone is like really old. I'm like, the orphans in India are telling me my iPhone is old. So I took all those pictures with that iPhone, and I just for me. And then thankfully, when my editor read the book, she was like, I want to see pictures. So then we just put my pictures in. So that worked out really well because we didn't negotiate that on the front end. And it's actually really expensive to add an insert like that, but they were happy to do it. So
do you have any thoughts about the origin of Black Madonna, and are they exist in some of these European countries where I kind of thought it was unexpected that you would find them in these white European countries.
Right. Yeah. And they're not understood as Black in the way that we understand race in the United States. But yeah, the majority of Black, I mean, there are about 450 Black Madonnas around the world that are like official. There are many more, but the official ones are like, they have like Catholic Church, the Catholic Church has come and said, okay, the miracles that are associated with this are legitimate. And then also they're connected to the earth. And they're like they are currently or have been pilgrimage sites. And so those are kind of the characteristics of what makes something a Black Madonna versus a Black Virgin, which a lot of churches in France have a Black Virgin. But yeah, the majority of them are in France, Spain, and Italy. Well over half, probably 2/3 in the world. Although they do exist in Africa, they do exist in the Caribbean, they exist in Latin America, and of course in the US too, but and in Asia actually, Philippines, Japan, there's several Black Madonnas. But I think there's few reasons. One, those parts of the world are like have been continuously inhabited for so long. They're also very close to Turkey and to the ancient world. That was kind of the center of the ancient world. And so a lot of the Black goddesses of old were, had reach into that part of France and in Italy, southern France, southern Spain. Those regions were also, especially France and Spain, were occupied by the Moors for about 800 years. So some of them come from just the fact that the people who were making them were Black. Many of them were pillaged during the Crusades. And so they were created in the Holy Land, and people understood Mary to be Black generally during that time. And so the Madonnas were Black, and they were brought back from the and then some of them, especially in the region where I did a lot of my walking, they were made of the Black lava rock. That whole region is surrounded by 47 volcanic mountains. And so the earth and all the rocks are super Black there because they're all lava rock. And so a bunch of those Black Madonnas were made from that lava rock. So they're Black because they were made from Black materials. And then lastly, Luke is known for according to the lore, Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke, which it's so hard who knows if this is true or not, but supposedly many of the famous Black Madonnas he carved himself or painted himself, which is just kind of interesting because Luke is like the most problematic of all the 4 gospel writers. So it's just interesting, but yeah, and then his version of Acts is sketchy. So yeah, there's a lot going on, but Luke and Mark were responsible for supposedly responsible for a lot of the movement of the Black Madonnas throughout the ancient world. And Mark was Libyan, so Mark was Black. So I think a lot of his attachment to the Black Madonna was probably because he was Black himself. So yeah.
Jennifer?
What baby is the Black Madonna holding?
The understanding is the Christ child. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I just am curious. You said Luke is the most problematic. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, so like Luke's, so there's all this like contested research on like who Paul was and what Paul actually wrote that we say Paul wrote. And so a lot of what we probably say Paul wrote, Paul probably didn't write because there's like multiple versions of Paul. And Luke's version of Paul is the most like political, the most, not just political, the most privileged. Like Paul was an oppressed Jew, yet technically he had Roman citizenship. But like there's certain times when Paul's clearly speaking from the perspective of an oppressed person under Roman Empire. And then there's times when Paul seems to be out there like kind of like moving through spaces like he owns the joint. And Luke is usually the one who's presenting that side of Paul, which is just really interesting. And so like some scholars have just pointed that out, that the version of Paul that we get that really supports this idea that he was kind of like a my way or the highway authoritarian leader who was really interested in like Christianity gaining power, you know, those come from Luke's stories of Paul. So yeah, I always liked Mark the best just because he's so succinct and to the point. And so I was like, so when I learned he was Libyan, which I actually learned through my Black Madonna research, I was like, of course, Mark's not playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We want to just say thank you for your work and the work that you're continuing to put out in the world. How can we follow you or keep up with all your new work, your new books, whatever else is coming? How can we follow you?
Thank you. Well, in terms of the Black Madonna work, my next big thing is I'm returning to France this fall to write a book on the Black Madonna, because my book's kind of about me too. This one will be about her, and it's called The Black Madonna for Racial Liberation, and it's an ancient spirituality for today's activists. So any prayers, good thoughts you can send my way, that would be awesome. Also a great way to support that work is through Patreon. So I have a Patreon page. So if you are interested in supporting me sustainably, that would be an amazing way to do it. I also go to my website because I have like a really wonderful, like God is a Black Woman monthly newsletter that we send out. That's kind of like a spiritual spa day. It's very luxurious and calming, I think. And then if you are a Black woman or you know Black women, I just linked up with Am Noir, and we're going to be launching our first Black Madonna pilgrimage for Black women next May in Paris. And so I'm really excited about that. And yeah, so those are kind of the Black Madonna things. And then also I'm doing a bunch of work around shame and race. And that's all like free stuff too. So if you just go to my website, you can sign up to get on my email list. And we're going to be doing like a big masterclass series later this summer on like healing from your own shame around whatever your racial identity is. So there's always something going on.
Sounds like it. Lots of exciting stuff. Well, yeah. We thank you for your book. We thank you for your time and such a beautiful conversation. So
thank you for being here.
Cross paths sometime in the future.